The Los Angeles Clippers are NBA title contenders. Next season, the Clippers are one of 11 NBA franchises that are yet to win an NBA title, and they seek to change that with the acquisition of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George 2.5 years ago. And although things have not gone to plan so far as winning an NBA title is concerned, next year looks like the year that could be the best shot for the Clippers to win the Larry O'Brien. I want to start by emphasizing that this season for the LA Clippers is going to be very beneficial for them as a team heading into next year, and has shown positive signs for them moving into next year. Clippers have been without Kawhi Leonard all season, and have only had 26 games of Paul George, yet still sit above 500 at 34-31, comfortably in the 8th seed, and they are 20-19 even without Paul George on the year. And again, this is without Kawhi Leonard. They are above 500 on the year without their two stars. This is a good, deep team. Clippers are a good team without these two, but assuming their returns from injury go well, the Clippers will be getting back a superstar and a perennial all-star alongside this group that is already an above 500 team. But let's start off focusing on the success of everyone else on the Clippers. Forget the stars. We know what they can do. Let's focus on everyone else alongside the very smart move they made at the deadline. The young and improving players on this roster have benefited greatly from the absence of these two stars. I can see it similarly to how the Warriors' young players benefited over the last couple of years of having Clay and Draymond and Steph miss significant time. They rebuilded, their young players got more playing time, they got time to learn the system and actual NBA minutes. And because of that, they now have valuable players like Jordan Poole and Damian Lee and Juan Toscano Anderson, who have developed over the last couple of years, have learned the system, and are now impactful pieces of the Golden State Warriors. The same can be said for the Clippers heading into the next season. There are players that have gotten significant minutes and bigger roles and are learning the NBA and the Clippers system more so than they would have otherwise. Players like Terrence Mann, Luke Kennard, who's had a big bounce back year, but more specifically Amir Coffey, who, by the way, deserves to be on a full-time contract and no longer in a two-way, but hopefully he gets that next year from the Clippers or otherwise. As well as rookie Brandon Boston Jr., who's had a very good rookie year, has been inconsistent, but has had very positive flashes. These young guys gaining more time to be comfortable in the NBA, not having the pressure of having to perform on a contender, but yet getting the minutes to be able to have more confidence, more ability, and more familiarity with their situation to be able to succeed next year on a contender is very impactful. Alongside the internal development of the Clippers this season, they have done a great job of acquiring more talent at the trade deadline. They brought in Norman Powell and Robert Covington for essentially nothing of significant value. And Norman Powell specifically is an amazing addition as it gives them more spacing and gives the Clippers a legit 3rd/4th option alongside Kawhi and Paul George. If you want to argue who should be the 3rd option between Reggie Jackson and Norman Powell, that's fair. Point being, they have 2 of them alongside Kawhi and Paul George. Pretty nice pieces to have in the backcourt. Having Norm, Marcus Morris, Luke Kennard, and Reggie around Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, that is some nice depth in scoring that you have on this team, some nice spacing that you have on this team. And Reggie's good against the Lakers, so keep him around, even if it's just for those Lakers games. He knows how to kill them. Robert Covington, of course, was also brought in that trade, but his contract is up at the end of the year, so there's no guarantee he will be on this Clippers roster heading into next season. But I think he's a piece that could re-sign on a mid-level exception and would be a solid wing depth piece to have. If they don't get him, whatever. Because you got Norm out of that trade. Pretty much nothing. However, the good news is that the majority of the Clippers players are returning next season. Other than Robert Covington, the only key rotational players that are going to be out of contract is Isaiah Hartenstein, who again is a rotational player and has been quite good this year, but backup center is fairly replaceable, and Amir Coffey, who I would suspect will be re-signed, but if he isn't, he's not the end of the world, because the depth on this Clippers team is very, very strong. Yes, their starting lineup is star-studded. It's going to be very good. It'll likely be a starting lineup of Reggie Jackson, Norman Powell, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Ivan Zubac. It's a formidable starting lineup. Don't get me wrong. It's going to be one of the best in the league and should be a top 5 defensive unit. But their depth, in my opinion, is what can really separate them. Marcus Morris, assuming he is not traded. Luke Kennard, Nick Batum, Terrence Mann, Brandon Boston, potentially Robert Covington, whoever else they have as a backup center, and potentially Amir Coffey, who, sure, you don't want to be playing consistent regular minutes for a playoff contender, or a title contender, but he's a fine piece. It's like a 13th man on your team. Can't really complain with that. They have 4 pieces on their bench who could be starting on multiple teams in the NBA. Luke Kennard very much could be a starter. Nick Batum has been a starter for the Clippers. Terrence Mann has been a starter this year. Marcus Morris has had multiple starting roles throughout his NBA career. These guys are all members of the Clippers bench. They are all going to be a member of the Clippers now for at least 2+ years heading into next year. They are going to know the system well. They are comfortable in their roles on this team. This is a team that has scary depth. And another thing to point out that's important with this Clippers team is their mentality, their identity, their culture is solid, it is formed, and it is good. Like, very good. Tyronn Lue's a big part of that. I think he's one of the best head coaches in the NBA. His coaching, his leadership, his motivation is very important to this group. This Clippers group, minus their stars currently, feels like the Clippers team a few years ago when they were an 8 seed, when they were not with Paul George, not with Kawhi Leonard. It was Danilo Gallinari, it was SGA, it was Patrick Beverley, and Beverley was dogging up KD in the playoffs and making him have a tough time to start off in that series. That's what I get from this team right now in LA. Maybe not to the same extent of defensive intensity, just because Patrick Beverley is Patrick Beverley, but it's that same type of feel, that same type of culture and mentality that now when you add in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George into this team next year, with everyone else having more development, more confidence, and knowing their roles in this team, it's going to be a really good team. It's going to be a really good team. This is a team now that has Norm around them, has their 2 stars back heading into next season. Assuming they recover well from their injuries, the Clippers are going to be one of the toughest teams to beat heading into next season. Led by their 2 all-stars and more depth than ever through their bench and through secondary scoring options in the starting lineup. Alongside one of the best head coaches in the NBA in Ty Lue, the Los Angeles Clippers have everything they need to be a 2023 NBA title contender.